At first glance, Parashah Vayera seems like a collection of stories, not unlike a Hollywood movie leading toward a dramatic confrontation, but more like a TV series with distinct episodes. Let's go over them. There's a visitation of angels, the great negotiation, which is in all likelihood has actually saved every city in the world. There is the forcible rescue of a reluctant Lot and his daughters, the desperation of Lot's daughters, the closing of the wombs of the household of Abimelech, the miraculous transformation of a 90-year-old woman and the birth of a son, the tragedy of Hagar, and the resulting blessing of the Arabic people. Lastly, and most importantly, Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son of promise, his last remaining son, because Ishmael was sent into the desert. That's a lot to process in one reading. Any one of those events is a major event, and nearly all of them affect the world we live in today. Right now, what unifies these seemingly unrelated stories? One overriding theme is that Adonai is merciful. Human reasoning would say, well, wait a minute now, hold on a second. God killed the people and all the animals in an entire valley. Abraham looked down into the valley and saw smoke and fire rising up to the sky like a raging furnace. But the spiritual mind knows every last soul in that valley will once again see life. Matthew 10, verse 15 makes it quite clear that those people will be raised up in the day of judgment. And that includes Lot's wife, who turned back to see the fate of her home and her possessions. Adonai is merciful and compassionate. For the sake of Abraham and his own namesake, Adonai has promised not to destroy a city if there are 10 righteous people in its vicinity. Let that sink in for a moment. That has saved virtually every city in this world. Literally, every city on earth has been protected by the great negotiation of Abraham. Hagar, however, Sarah's handmaiden, given to Abraham as a wife, well, she suffered a different fate. She found herself destitute, alone, no food, no water, no hope, in a desert, just cast aside. Her son, a young man by this time, felt despair and hopelessness, abandoned under a shaded area, a shaded tree, too tired and too thirsty to follow his mother, who had stumbled away into the distance. Hagar sat down opposite Ishmael, and she lifted up her voice and wept. Genesis 21, verse 16. It is when all hope was lost that Adonai was merciful to Hagar, to Ishmael, and to countless millions of her descendants who are here today. Not only did he hear their cries, but he gave a promise that as a people, they would become prominent on the earth. And guess what? So they are today. No one can deny this fact. There is another unifying factor in these stories. The redemption of all humanity would come through the miraculous birth and resurrection of Abraham's son. Sarah was 90 years old when she gave birth to Isaac. It was impossible then, and it's impossible right now, even today, with all of the best medical procedures and interventions. Just after a certain age, women stop producing eggs. Their bodies, their hormones change. This is important for a number of reasons, because it brings out the miraculous of the birth. And Genesis 21 states that after Isaac was born, Sarah breastfed and weaned her child. How is this possible? Actually, one of the best exchanges in all of Torah is between Adonai and Sarah on this very subject. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the way of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I've grown decrepit, can I have desire? And my Lord is so old." Then Adonai said to Abraham, "Why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, 'Can I really give birth when I am so old?' Is anything too difficult for Adonai? At the appointed time, I will return. I will return to you in about a year, and Sarah will have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I didn't laugh," for she was afraid. But he said, "No, for you did laugh." Genesis 18:11 through 15. Hebrew is much more explicit. Sarah said, after she is Bala, and that word means worn out, wasted, decayed. Much more vivid than decrepit. Sarah knew humanly her body couldn't suddenly support a growing child, let alone a birth and breastfeeding. Just the thought of it was funny, so she laughed. She laughed to herself. Once a woman becomes pregnant, a little bit of science for all of you out there. Once a woman becomes pregnant, they start what's called lactogenesis. It's a hormone process which begins a few months into the pregnancy. It's one of the reasons why grandmothers can look at their granddaughters and say, "Aha, you've been messing around." Without getting graphic, Sarah's body began to transform. Her 80-something-year-old breasts began to fill up. Her sagging skin began to glow and plump up. And more than likely, she began to transform into a much younger-looking woman. This is quite likely why Abimelech's soldiers looked at her and decided, "Hey, let's take her to become one of the king's wives." It is well known that kings desire the most unique, most beautiful woman to fill their harems. Sarah must have been striking. She likely looked like a much younger woman because of the transformation of her body. Of course, we know Adonai kept Abimelech from touching Sarah. As a matter of fact, he came to him in a dream and he said, "You're a dead man." Now, I don't know about you, but I would be terrified if that happened. He told him, "You're a dead man if you even touch her." We like to gloss over parts of the Torah, but the truth is that Isaac and later Jacob were miraculous, impossible births. Rebekah, another beautiful woman, was barren, unable to have children until Isaac prayed for her conception. Rachel, who would give birth to Joseph and is the matriarch of the largest tribes of Israel. Let that sink in for a moment. Ephraim and Manasseh occupied the largest of the tribes of Israel. And eventually, Rachel, who was also the matriarch of two of the world's most powerful nations on earth, was also barren until Adonai opened her womb. This means that many of the children of promise, the Jewish people and the northern tribes who would later create the world's most prosperous nations on earth, were literally conceived by the Eternal. Literally conceived by the Eternal. The mere existence of the Jewish people is a living promise that our Father will never abandon his creation, nor leave this world separated from his love. And yet, we see today the world unwilling to live with the children of promise and the Father who conceived them. Make no mistake, what we call anti-Semitism is rebellion against the children of the Father and rebellion against children himself, and rebellion against the Father who conceived the children. What's more, there's an all-out war to block the birth of children, not only here, in virtually every nation in the world, and a great desire to break up families. Many years after Sarah, another woman found herself going through the process of pregnancy. This time, it's an old priest named Zechariah who was visited by the angel Gabriel. Just so you are not confused, the priest did not get pregnant. It was his wife. So the old priest named Zechariah was doing his service in the temple, and he was visited by the angel Gabriel. Zechariah was told that he would have a child. Zechariah could not believe he can conceive a child, let alone one with the spirit and power of Elijah. Zechariah said to the angel, "How will this happen? How will I know this is for certain? I'm an old man, and my wife is well advanced in age." You can see that in the first book of Luke, the first chapter of Luke, Luke 1. In this case, Zechariah's wife, Elizabeth, must have gone through the same biological changes that Sarah went through. So, what do you think she did? Well, she hid herself. Luke 1, which was written by a physician, said Elizabeth hid herself for 5 months. Again, a miraculous pregnancy. There was even more. There was another, even more miraculous birth than Isaac, Jacob, and Rabbi John the Immerser. In this account, the angel Gabriel was sent by Adonai into a town in the Galilee named Nazareth, and to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph, or Yusuf, in the house of David. The virgin's name was Miriam. And coming to her, the angel said, "Shalom, favored one. Adonai is with you." But at the message, she was perplexed and kept wondering, what kind of greeting could this be? The angel spoke to her, "Do not be afraid, Miriam, for you have found favor with God. Behold, you will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Yeshua. He will be great and will be called Ben Elyon. Adonai Elohim will give him the throne of David, his father. He shall reign over the house of Jacob for all eternity, and his kingdom will be without end." Miriam said to the angel, "Well, how can this be since I'm not intimate with the man?" And responding, the angel said to her, "The Ruach HaKodesh will come upon you, and the power of Elyon will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One being born will be called Ben Elohim." Notice what he said here. The Holy One being born will be called Ben Elohim. That account is in Luke 1, 26 through 35. It was the destiny of the miraculous Yeshua to one day lay down his life to redeem the miraculous children of the Father. It makes perfect sense if you think about it. Yeshua was unique in every way. Born of a woman, just as Isaac and Jacob and John the Immerser, yet he was born Ben Elyon. He was the one and only son conceived in this way, without a male human father. A miraculous birth. Adam was not conceived this way. As a matter of fact, Adam was rather made from dust. He had no father, but Adam was made from dust. So let's go back to Genesis. In Genesis, Adonai, who would sacrifice his own unique son, needed to know something. He needed to know if Abraham would be willing to do the same. Isaac, like Ben Elyon, did not resist his father. Though he could have easily run away or overpowered the older man, he lay upon the altar and likely closed his eyes, waiting for the moment at the hands of his father Abraham. But remember this, Adonai is merciful and compassionate. Adonai, Adonai, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness and truth, showing mercy to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Those are the attributes of Adonai given to us in Exodus 34 by himself, by Adonai himself. Exodus 34, verses 6 through 7. Every last one of the attributes of Adonai are actually reflected in Vayera. Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Ishmael, even Abimelech and his household, Lot, his wife and daughters, and the people in Sodom and Gomorrah all have and will see Adonai's attributes. Adonai is slow to anger, compassionate, gracious, loving kindness, full of loving kindness, mercy, and forgiveness of sins. Otherwise, these men and women and the animals who died in Sodom and Gomorrah will not be resurrected. But because he has sworn by his own name, these things will happen. We too share in the greatness of Adonai Elohim through the atoning death, sacrifice, and resurrection of Ben Elohim, Yeshua, our Messiah. But back in Genesis, then Abraham reached out his hand, and he took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of Adonai called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, Hineni. Then he said, do not reach out your hand against the young man. Do nothing to him at all. For now I know that you are one who fears God. You did not withhold your son, your only son, from me. Genesis 22, verses 10 through 12. Abraham, the friend of Elohim, shares a very special relationship forever with Adonai. You see, both of them were willing to suffer the sacrifice of a one and only unique son. And that is one of the reasons why Abraham is the friend of Elohim forever and ever. Shabbat Shalom.